So I will discuss first what is the risk faced by financial institutions. First is the credit risk. The risk that promise cash flows from the loans and securities held by financial institutions may not be paid in full. Ibig sabihin, nangutang sa financial institution yung company, then pinautang siya ng company, then natagal ang panahon ay hindi nababayaran ng firm yung utang niya sa financial institution. So, credit risk yung tawag dun. Nagpautang siya, then hindi na fulfill ng firm or ng business yung obligation niya dun sa financial institutions. Next is the liquidity risk. The risk that a sudden and unexpected increase in liability withdrawals may require and financial institutions to liquidate assets in a very short period of time at a low prices. So, ibig sabihin daw nito ay kinakailangan agad ng financial institution na maliquidate agad yung assets kasi kailangan nilang mabayaran yung obligations nila kasi lumalaki na yung liability nila. So, para makakuha ng pambayad doon, kailangan nilang maibenta agad yung kanilang mga assets or mga pag-aari. Pero dahil nga madalian yun para mabili agad sa market, ang ginagawa nila is binababaan agad nila yung value ng kanilang asset. Mas mababa pa sa market value yung halaga ng kanilang ibinebentang asset. Para nga naman mabili to agad. So, yun yung problema kapag hindi napaplano ng maayos ng financial institution ng paglalabas niya ng pera o paggasto nito. Next is interest rate risk. Interest rate risk is the risk incurred by a financial institution when the maturities of its asset and liabilities are mismatched and interest rates are volatile. Ibig sabihin na babago yung value ng kanilang asset, your maturity ng asset. Kumbaga, naglagay sila ng interest dun sa isang pinautang nila na 3%, then pagtagal ng panahon is yung 3% na pinatong nila dun sa pinautang nila is ang nangyayari, hindi na gawin yung value, mas magiging mababa pa. So parang nawala lang din yung halaga nung ginawa nilang 3% dati. Kasi pagtagal ng panahon, yung value na lang ng 3% is nagiging 2%. Next is market risk. The risk incurred in trading assets and liabilities due to changes in interest rates, exchange rates, and other assets prices. Ibig sabihin, ito yung pabago-bago nangyayari sa market. Dahil sa pagtaas ng interest rates, pagbaba, dahil sa pag-iba ng value ng pera, gaya ng palitan ng dolyar sa peso na dati is nung panahon ni Marcos is 1:1, then ngayon ang $1 is 48, naglalaro sa 48 to 50 na lang ngayon. Then other is yung asset prices, nagpabago-bago yung value ng asset depende dun sa paggamit or dun sa lugar kung nasaan yung asset mo. Nangyayari din ang problema sa market risk dahil sa inflation, deflation, and fluctuation na nangyayari. Next is off-balance sheet risk. The risk incurred by a financial institution as the result of its related to contingent assets and liabilities. Itong off-balance sheet risk, pag i-define natin siya, hindi siya inilalagay sa balance sheet ng financial institution. Kasi ang scenario dito is, kunyari, ako ay may 1 million. Then nilagay ko lang siya sa bangko. Then ginamit ko yung bangko or yung sa bangko as a tool para mag-i-invest ako sa ibang mag-i-invest ako sa iba. Then parang ang nangyari, yung bangko is pinaglagahan ko lang ng pera, parang instrument ko lang siya. So ang mangyayari, hindi yan isusulat or ilalagay ng bangko as kanya. Kasi hindi naman yun dineposit na para lang gamitin, kumbaga savings, para bang ginamit ko rin siya. Pagkalagay ko sa bangko is ginamit ko lang tool yung bangko para mailagay dun sa iba na talagang gusto kong paglagyan. Parang nangyayari ito madalas siguro sa stocks, dahil naglagay ka sa bangko, then yung laman ng sa pera mo doon is ililipat mo rin naman sa iba. So, yun na nga, foreign exchange risk naman yung kasunod. The risk that exchange rate changes can affect the value of an financial institution's assets and liabilities denominated in foreign currencies. Ibig sabihin, kung yung dating value ng kung nagkakaroon ng fluctuations dito sa atin, then nagkakaroon ng bumababang value ng peso sa dollar or sa iba pang mga currencies, bumababa rin yung value ng ating mga assets. So next na kinakaharap ng financial institutions na risk is country or sovereign risk. The risk that repayments by foreign borrowers may be interrupted because of interference from foreign governments or other political entities. Ibig sabihin nito is yung financial institution is nagpautang dun sa foreign businesses or foreign firms. Then, sa time na babayaran na nila yon ng foreign firms or businesses is nangyayari, napipigilan or naaantala dahil sa policy siguro na pinatutupad dun sa ibang bansa na yon. Next is technology risk. Technology risk, the risk incurred by an financial institution when its technological investment do not produce anticipated cost savings. Ibig sabihin nito is pag laging pabago-bago yung nag-i-improve yung technology is kailangan din nating makisabay dun sa technology advancement. So, ano nangyayari? Nagagastusan tayo masyado. Then, nagagastusan rather yung financial institution na mas tumataas pa yung cost niya. Nahihirapan na gumastos kasi puro gastos ang nangyayari. So, next is insolvency risk. The risk that a financial institution may not have enough capital to offset a sudden decline in the value of its assets relative to its liabilities. Ibig sabihin, naging insolvent, parang nakaramdam na ng insolvency yung financial institution na wala na silang hawak na capital. Hindi na enough yung capital na hawak nila para makapagbayad dun sa mga utang nila or dun sa para nade-decline na yung kanilang operations dahil nga insolvent na sila, hindi na sila solvent, kumbaga wala na silang hawak na capital or enough capital para mag-operate ng maayos or para makapagbayad sa mga obligations na kailangan nilang bayaran.
Dr. Nangas, my report is all about why financial institutions need to manage risk. First, let us define what is risk. Risk can be defined as probability of having an expected negative outcome. Ito yung mga bagay na hindi tayo sigurado kung ano ba yung magiging resulta niya. Maaaring siya ay mabuti o ito ay magiging masama. Sa business, ito is yung mga bagay na humahantang sa ability ng isang kumpanya na mag-achieve yung kanilang specific goals. Ito yung mga companies plan or organizational plan na hindi na-meet yung kanilang specific target or specific goals.
There are many risks that the business is exposed to. First ay strategic risk. Second, compliance risk. Third, reputational risk. Fourth, financial risk. Sa strategic, ito ay nangyayari dahil din sa certain decision made by the management. Pwede siyang sa expansion of new geographic area or yung operating in a particular project line. Sa compliance naman ay ito yung mga subject dun sa legislative and bureaucratic rules and regulation. Kasali dito yung employee protection at saka yung mga environmental regulation. Sa reputational risk naman, ito yung mga naging resulta dahil dun sa company's action na nakasira dun sa company's brand name. Ang nagiging risk dito ay yung product failure or yung lawsuit against the company. And yung part ay yung financial risk. Ito ay yung risk na kalimitang kinakaharap ng business in terms dun sa pag-handle ng mga finances such as default dun sa loans or yung mga debt load.
Ang next ay yung risk management. Risk refers to the practice of identifying potential risks in advance, analyzing them, and taking precautionary steps to reduce or curb the risk. Ito yung mga paraan na ginagamit ng isang business upang maiwasan nila ng mas maaga yung risk na posibleng mangyari in the future. Ang risk kasi is nakadepende sa type of financial instrument na gagamitin ng isang company. Halimbawa, pwede siyang in the form of high inflation, volatility in capital, recession, or bankruptcy. Kasi kapag ang isang entity ay nakagawa ng isang investment decision, na-expose nila yung sarili nila into a number of certain risk. Kaya mahalaga na ang isang business bago gumawa ng decision ay kailangan alam nila kung paano nila mamamanage yung risk and paano nila maiiwasan ito sa darating or in the future.
Ang next ay why managing risk matters. Bakit nga ba mahalaga na alam natin kung paano i-manage yung risk? Ang una ay because the industry could not have survived without it. Ang risk kasi is naging integral part na siya ng business. So, it is important na alam natin kung paano i-manage yung mga posibleng kaharapin ng ating bawat decision at lalo na sa investment decision. Kung hindi kasi natin alam yung tamang pagmamanage nito, maaari itong mag-lead sa pagkalugi o yun na nga yung pinakamasama ay yung mag-lead siya sa bankruptcy ng isang kumpanya. Ang isa pang reason kung bakit kailangan ma-manage ang risk ay to minimize and control exposure of investment to such risk. Katulad nga ng sinasabi ko kanina, kapag ang isang entity ay nakagawa na ng isang investment decision, na-expose nila yung sarili nila to a number of risk. So, pag hindi nila binigyan ng pansin yung risk management habang gumagawa sila ng investment decision, maaari itong makasira sa kanilang mga investment during the times of financial turmoil. For example, yung fixed deposit ay considered siya as less risky investment, while yung mga equity investment naman ay nakukonsidered siya as risky venture. When the management or practicing risk management, yung equity investor and fund managers ay pinaghihiwalay yung kanilang mga portfolio to minimize the exposure to their risk. Ang another reason ay to avoid failure and to maximize risk-adjusted rate of return on capital or RAROC. Ang RAROC ay common approach na ginagamit ng mga banks or institution para makompute nila yung expected rate of return on capital. Ginagamit din nila itong tool para makontrol yung risk, particularly na from its lending businesses. Nako-compute ang RAROC as revenue less operating cost less liquidity cost less average loss over economic capital. Kapag ang isang institution ay nag-focus sa pagkakaroon ng kanilang RAROC, naiiwasan nila yung pag-emphasize dun sa activities and investment na mayroon ngang higher return pero mataas din naman yung risk na maaaring makuha. Ang pagkakaroon ng risk management ay naglilid sa better management decision and more efficient allocation of capital and other resources. Another is risk management also contributes to the strength and efficiency of the economy. Ang risk management ay nakakatulong sa pamamagitan ng pagpo-provide ng mga design na nag-allocate ng resources, especially yung mga financial resources na may efficient use. Ang mga project na may matataas na risk-adjusted expected profitability ang kalimitang nagsasucceed and more likely to be financed na naglilid para magkaroon ng economic growth. Ang isang negative example na nagpakita ng lack of risk management ay ang Barings Bank. Ang Barings Bank ay one of the oldest bank in the world that was located at Britain. Noong 1992 at the age of 22, si Nick Leeson ay naging general manager na ng Barings. Sa kagustuhan niyang may mapatunayan at makapag-develop ng stock trading on the Singaporean Stock Exchange, ang ginawa niya is nakapag-trade siya personally na hindi dapat ginagawa ng isang general manager. At ang isa pa ay nag-hire siya ng staff para sa back office, which is ang back office ay responsible for settlement, support, and accounting of derivative transaction. Yung mga na-hire na staff ni Nick Leeson ay mga bata pa at wala pang experience. Kaya nagkaroon sila ng problema kasi hindi na niya nagabayan o nabigyan ng guidance yung kanyang mga workers. And after ilang months, doon nila na-discover na one of his employee ay nakapag-purchase ng 20 future contracts sa Japan government bond. At para makabawi dun sa error na nagawa ng kanyang employee, ang ginawa niya ay nag-open siya ng account na nagko-conceal ng mga unauthorized transaction. Yung mga negative transaction naman na yun ay nakatulong upang mag-continue na mag-grow yung borrowings at saka ma-cover nila yung loss na nawala sa kanila. Kaya ang ginawa ni Nick Leeson ay pinagpatuloy niya yung mga unauthorized transaction kahit hindi alam nung management. After ilang month, nag-audit sila at nakitang ang loss ng company ay nag-triple sa 600 million na naging dahilan ng bankruptcy. And na-discover din ng mga auditor na si Leeson ay nag-commit ng fraud. At dahil nga lack of risk management, nag-arise yung operational risk, which is yun yung failure to control the transaction, which is nakapag-commit pa sila ng fraud na nag-lead to have a higher risk at naging dahilan kung bakit na bankrupt yung Barings Bank.
Good afternoon po. I am here to report the part of our group support, which is credit risk. What is credit risk? Credit risk is a risk of loss that may occur from the failure of any party to abide the terms and conditions of any financial contract, principally the failure to make required payments on loans due to an entity. And we also add that credit risk refers to the risk of default or non-payment or non-adherence to contractual obligations by a borrower. For example, may isang tao or institution na gustong mangutang kay bangko. Yung tao na yon or institution na yon ay tatawagin natin borrower. Tapos si borrower mag-a-approach kay bangko para mangutang at si bangko naman magle-lend ng money para kay borrower. Pero bago yon, magiging subject muna si borrower para sa credit assessment. And after na ma-approve ang credit assessment, makakomply po si borrower sa lahat ng requirements. Magbabayad na si borrower para sa bank loan na inutang niya kay bank na kasama na ang interest. But some borrower may fail to repay the loans on agreement. That's why the bank facing such risk in lending is called credit risk. Meaning, ito po yung mga pagkakautang na posibleng hindi mabayadan sa tamang oras or pagkakautang na posibleng hindi na talaga mababayaran ng mga borrower. Here are the causes for credit risk problems in the banks. Cause number 1, credit concentration. Where majority of lending of the banks is concentrated on a specific borrower or borrowers or specific sectors, it causes a credit concentration. Therefore, in order to ensure that the credit risk is kept at a lower rate, it is important that lending practices are distributed amongst the wide range of borrowers and sectors. Meaning, hindi lang dapat iisa ang pinapautang ng bangko para hindi sa isang sector lang or isang tao or company lang na lalagak yung pera nila. Cause number 3, the cyclical performances. The cyclical performance of the industry must also be taken into account in order to arrive the results of credit evaluations more accurately. That's why the project finance division of the bank is exposed to risks that are particular to its lending and trading businesses and the environment with it operates. And then, what factors are used to assess credit risk? The financial position of the borrower by analyzing the quality of financial statements, its past financial performance, its financial flexibility in terms of the ability to raise capital and its capital adequacy. Ngayon, may mga matatalino ng bangko na nagbibigay ng agents para imbestigahan yung mga mangungutang bago pautangin. Kaya dapat tinitingnan muna nila yung mga pautangin nila para malaman kung makakabayad yung mga mangungutang. Second, the borrower's relative market position and operating efficiency. Yun na nga yun. The quality of management by analyzing its tracking record, payment record, and financial conservatism. Credit ratings are the critical input for the credit approval process as they help the firm to determine the desired credit risk spread over its cost of funds by considering the borrower's credit rating and the default pattern corresponding to the credit rating. Ito yung mga bako na nagbibigay ng or mga agents na nagbibigay ng ratings kagaya ng from AAA to hindi na talaga makakabayad yung mangungutang. Tapos doon nila malalaman kung makakabayad pa yung borrower or hindi talaga. Kaya doon malalaman kung approve yung proposal or hindi. That's why every proposal for facility is reviewed by the appropriate industry specialist, yun na nga po yung agents, in the credit risk management group before being submitted for approval to the appropriate approval authority. And that's all po.
So my name is Jamaica Merando, and the next topic is about the liquidity risk na natakal na in our previous discussion, na ulitin ko lang ulit in my own version. So what is liquidity risk? The risk that a sudden and unexpected increase in liability withdrawals may require a financial institution to liquidate assets in a very short period of time and at low prices. Meaning, ang liquidity risk ay nag-occurs kapag ang financial institutions ay hindi na-meet yung short-term debt obligations nila. Kumbaga, hindi na-convert yung assets into cash or mas malaki yung other assets kaysa sa cash nila. Next is, the financial institutions depend upon borrowed money to a considerable extent. So, they're commonly studied to determine whether they can meet their debt obligations using realizing great losses which could be catastrophic. So, ang liquidity risk is nag-a-arise siya kapag ang financial institution, yung liability holders or yung depositors or yung insurance policy holders is nagdemand ng madali ang pera, which is karapatan nila o yung tinatawag na financial claim or yung right to borrow. For example, kapag yung liability holder nga ay nag-demand ng pera or gusto mag-withdraw, which is araw-araw may nag-withdraw, ay na dapat yung financial institution is may perang may bibigay kasi ang most liquid asset sa lahat is yung cash or yung pera. Sabi dito, low cash holdings are generally not a problem. Kasi, yun nga, araw-araw may nagwi-withdraw, by liability holders are generally predictable. And large financial institution can normally expect to borrow additional funds to meet any sudden shortfalls or cash in a money and financial markets. Institution, therefore, ay may kinakaharap na strict agreement requirements and test or yung stress test para ma-measure nila yung kanilang financial stability. So, how can avoid liquidity risk? So, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation or yung FDIC released a proposal in April 2016 that created a net stable funding ratio. It was intended to help increase banks' liquidity during periods of financial stress. Actually, hindi talaga ma-avoid yun ng ibang institutions. Pero ginamitan nila ito ng ratio kung saan nagpapakita ito kung ang bangko ba is nagmamay-ari ng high quality assets na madaling i-convert into cash na sa loob ng isang taon. Pero ang bangko kasi hindi sila masyado nagre-rely sa mga short-term funding which is unstable yun. During the 2008 financial crisis, many big banks failed or faced insolvency issues due to liquidity problems. The FDIC ratio is in the line with the International Basel Standard created in 2015, and it reduces banks' vulnerability in the event of another financial crisis. So yun nga, sa tulong ng FDIC ratio, na-reduce yung bank's vulnerability. So sa companies, may financial risk din. Ay may liquidity risk. Kapag too much na yung liquidity risk nila, naglalabas sila ng ibang assets or nagsisale sila or mag-a-add sila ng revenue o kaya naghahanap sila ng ibang paraan para mabawasan yung discrepancy or yung inconsistent between cash at yung debt obligations nila. So yung key takeaways, liquidity is ability of a firm, company, or even an individual to pay its debts without suffering catastrophic losses. Investors, managers, and creditors use liquidity measures ratios when deciding the level of risk within an organization. So yun, investors, managers, and creditors, gumagamit sila ng liquidity measurement ratios nga kapag nagde-decide sila ng risk or para makita nila yung level of risk ng organization nila. If an individual investor's business or financial institution cannot meet its short-term debt obligation, it is experiencing liquidity risk.
Good afternoon everyone. Ang topic ko ay interest rate risk. So, ano nga ba ang interest rate risk? So, base dito, ang interest rate risk daw ay, it is the chance that an expected change in interest rate will negatively affect the value of an investment. So, ibig sabihin nito, Yung interest rate risk daw ay yung biglaang pagbabago ng interest rate. Tapos, may negative effect siya dun sa value ng investment mo. Then, other meaning ng interest rate risk ay interest rate risk is the potential for investment losses. The result from a change in interest rates. If interest rates rise, for instance, the value of bond or other fixed income investment will decline. So, ibig sabihin nito yung yung interest rate risk. Maaring magkaroon ka ng investment losses dahil dun sa biglang pagbabago ng interest rates. Tapos, sabi dito, kapag once na tumas yung interest rate, the value of a bond or other fixed income investment na meron ka ay bababa. Ang halimbawa nito ay halimbawa ako, investor ako. Nag-avail ako ng 5% na may bond na may 5% interest rate. Tapos, yung market, nag-o-offer na siya ng 6% rate. Nung pagkatapos ko siyang binili, noon ba binili ko siya ng 5%, tapos biglang nagbago yung interest rate ng market, naging 6%. So, kapag ako, investor ako, gusto ko na siyang yung investment ko sa yung bond na nabili ko na may 5% risk, gusto ko na siyang ibenta na dun, halimbawa, yung bibili niya yung sa mababang presyo kaysa dun sa una ko siyang binili. Kasi nga, yung value ng bond ko, mababa na. Kasi nga, tumaas yung interest rate ng market. So, ibig sabihin nun, low yielding na yung bond ko na binenta ko dun sa bibili. Kasi, ang concept kasi ng interest rate risk, once na mataas yung interest rate, mababa yung presyo ng bond or yung value ng bond. So, vice versa. Pag mababa yung interest rate, mataas naman yung value ng bond or yung price ng bond. So, paano nga ba mamamanage yung interest rate risk? Meron akong 4 dito. Una, diversification. Pangalawa, safer investment. Then, pangatlo, selling long-term bonds. And then, pang-apat ay purchasing floating rate bonds. So, una, yung diversification, ibig sabihin yung investment mo daw ay dapat ilagay mo siya sa iba't ibang industries, companies, areas para pag once na mag-fall yung value ng investment mo, yung mag-fall yung price ng value ng investment mo ay hindi siya malulugi lahat. Halimbawa, yung isang investment mo lang yung bumagsak yung presyo, ibig sabihin, yun, parang yung isang yun lang yung medyo magkakaroon ka ng losses. Pero yung sa the rest ay safe siya or okay. Then, next naman ay yung safer investments. Sinasabi sa safer investment daw, the safest option for investor who are trying to reduce the risk associated with interest rate is to invest in bonds and certificates which have short maturity tenure. Securities with short maturity tenure are less susceptible. So, yung pangatlo ay selling long-term bonds. So, ano nga ba ang selling long-term bonds? It is a common method which is often used in selling the long-term bonds. This is effectively clears up the investment funds for reinvestment in bonds with higher returns, thus allowing investors to manage the interest rate risk better. Then, it is advisable to reinvest in securities which have shorter maturity tenure since these carry lesser risk related to interest rates. So, dito, parang sinasabi na yung mga long-term, yung kung meron kang mga long-term bonds, pwede mo siyang ibenta para dun sa reinvestment para makapag-invest ka ng panibagong bonds na may higher returns. At dahil dun, mamamanage mo ng mas mabuti yung interest rate risk na maaaring harapin. Then, dito, advisable din dito yung yung katulad ng sa safer investment na mag-acquire or mag-reinvest sa mga securities or bonds na may short-term maturity, tenure. Kasi daw, yung mga short-term maturity na mga securities or investment ay mababa yung risk when it comes to interest rates. Then, yung pang-apat naman ay purchasing floating rate bonds. So, ang ibig sabihin naman nito ay as suggested by its name, have a rate of interest which is directly related to market fluctuations. It is advisable to invest in these securities since being related to the market fluctuations, the return on these investments go up and down too. They should also be bought in a healthy mix of long-term and short-term investment. While this cannot always be used to calculate the exact return, it is helpful in reducing the interest rate risk involved. So dito, pinagsasama dito yung pag-i-invest sa long-term tsaka short-term. Yung healthy mix or yung maayos na pagsasama nung long-term tsaka short-term na investment. Dito sa pang-apat ng purchasing floating rate bonds, hindi niya talaga nakakalculate yung exact return ng investment mo. Pero, helpful siya in a way na nare-reduce niya yung interest rate risk na involved dun sa investment mo. Then, so, next is types of interest rate risk. May dalawa dong type ng interest rate risk. Una, price risk tsaka reinvestment risk. So, ano ba yung price risk? Base sa nabasa ko, price risk is the risk that the value of a security or investment will decrease. Next is the risk. It is the risk that the value of a security or portfolio. Dito sa pang-apat ng purchasing floating rate bonds, hindi niya talaga nakakalculate yung exact return ng investment mo. Pero, helpful siya in a way na nare-reduce niya yung interest rate risk na involved dun sa investment mo. Then, so, next is types of interest rate risk. May dalawa dong type ng interest rate risk. Una, price risk tsaka reinvestment risk. So, ano ba yung price risk? Base sa nabasa ko, price risk is the risk that the value of a security or investment will decrease. Next is the risk. It is the risk that the value of a security or portfolio will decline in the future. Ang example ko dito ay halimbawa, nagbili ako ng shares na worth 100 shares tapos 10 pesos per share siya. Halimbawa, pag nagkaroon ng recession ng economy in the future, may chance na bababa yung price nung shares na nabili ko. So, ibig sabihin dun, bababa yung value nung shares na nabili ko. So, next ay reinvestment risk. Ano nga ba yung reinvestment risk? Reinvestment risk occurs when you have money from a maturing fixed income investment such as certificate of deposit or a bond, and you want to make a new investment of the same type. The risk is that you will not be able to find the same rate of return on your new investment as you were realizing on the old one. In fact, the return could be significantly lower based on what's happening in the economy at large, though it could also be higher. So, ibig sabihin kasi ng reinvestment risk, ito yung halimbawa, may investment ako, unang investment ko, meron siyang rate of return na 6%. Tapos, gagawa ako ng, magmamature na yun siya, yung 6% ko yun. So, ang gagawin ko, mag-i-invest ako ng panibago. Tapos, yung rate of return niya na yun, 4%. So, dun pa lang, nakaharap ko na yung risk na hindi na katulad yung dating, yung ina-expect kong rate of return nung katulad nung dati. Kasi nga, bumaba na yung rate of return niya. Bakit daw yun bumababa yung mga rate of return pag sa isang investment? Kasi daw, isang malaki impact dun ay yung economy. Ibig sabihin, yung economy, bumabagsak siya or humaharap siya sa recession. Yan.
Good afternoon everyone. Ang topic ko ngayon is market risk. Ano nga ba ang market risk? Ang market risk refers to risk that investment face due to fluctuation in the market. Ibig sabihin, ang market risk daw ay posibleng nakaka-apekto sa investment dahil sa fluctuation ng market. Ang pangalawa naman is the risk is that the investment value will decrease. Ang market risk daw ang dahilan kung bakit bumababa ang value ng investment. Ang pangatlong ibig sabihin ng market risk is also known as systematic risk. Ngayon, magbibigay ako ng example ng market risk concept. Halimbawa, gusto kong bumili na ng sasakyan. May dalawang choices akong pagpipilian. Yung una, branded na sasakyan na kotse pero may warranty. Yung pangalawa naman is second hand siya pero wala siyang warranty. Pero nakadepende sa akin kung ano yung i-afford ko. Kung saan ako mas comfortable and kung saan yung mas alam ko doon sa sasakyan na yun. Yung knowledge ko na yun. Tapos yung mga risk na posible kong harapin kung bibiling ko yung isang sasakyan doon sa dalawang pipiliin ko. After kong ma-check yung dalawang different ng kotse na gusto kong piliin, mas inisip ko na kahit sino dun sa dalawang piliin ko na kotse na yung branded ba na may warranty or yung second hand na walang warranty, di pa rin may iwasan yung risk lalo na kapag nagdadrive ako. Halimbawa, sa pag-i-invest, si company A o si company B is may iba't ibang offer sa akin about sa investment ko na gusto kong pasukan sa dalawang company na gusto kong i-try. Pero, dumadating pa rin sa punto na kahit ano yung piliin mo, si company man ang piliin mo, di pa rin maiiwasan yung risk kasi naandun talaga yun. And next is market risk may involve. Number 1 is currencies. Dito naman pumapasok yung mga peso or dollar. Yung risk dito is katulad sa dollar, minsan tumataas yung value ng dollar, minsan bumababa. And next naman is commodities. Ang commodities naman is, halimbawa na lang dito is gasol or gasolina. Halimbawa, gasolina. Minsan, mapapansin mo pa magpapagasolina ka, minsan mataas, minsan mababa. Depende lang din sa naayon sa government. And yung shares, halimbawa sa shares din, minsan tumataas din, minsan bumababa din, di ba? Ganun talaga. Dumako naman tayo sa potential event or situation contribution ng market risk. Ang market risk nga pala is include many different situations or event over which we have no control. Number 1 dito is civil unrest. Ito yung mga nangyayaring rally or mga war na dahilan dito sa pagbaba ng ekonomiya. Dahil dito, bumababa yung value ng pera. Next naman is yung natural disaster na hindi natin inaasahan na risk din. Halimbawa sa ating Pilipinas na nangyayari ngayon. Dahil dito, magiging damage dito yun sa market. Pangatlo naman is yung economic sanction. Economic sanction is takes away some forms of trade or financial relation from a country. Dito yung bumababa yung shares. Market risk factors. Number 1 is equity risk. The risk that share price will change. Number 2 is commodity risk. The likelihood that a commodity price just as the metal or grain will change. Ito yung sabi ko na kanina po. Tapos ito rin yung pangatlo. Currency risk. The probability that foreign exchange rate will change. Ito yung katulad ngayon, yung dollar ngayon is dati is 50, ngayon ay 48 na. Tapos yung next is interest rate risk. The risk that interest rate will go up or down, pabago-bago. Tapos inflation risk. The risk that's over all risk is the price of goods and services will undermine and value of money and probably observe and impact the value of investment. That's another meaning nun is also called purchasing power risk is the change that the cash flows from an investment would be worth at in the future because of change in purchasing power due to inflation.